Thank you so much, everybody, for, uh, joining us this evening. We're here to address a multifaceted challenge. And before we get to our illustrious panel here, I want to give my director, Cheryl Meck, the floor because there are a few words that she'd like to provide.
All right. Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, I'd like to thank each of you for taking the time out to be in this space tonight. I think that this is such an important event, and I'm glad that we were able to hold it in the Zoom space to give, easy accessibility for all of us, and a break in the cold in the cold heart of January. My name is Cheryl. I'm the director of the Civil Rights Division at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. This is what is known as a no hate in our state town hall. Typically, they are held in person, but we chose to move forward with a Zoom platform tonight. Hector alluded to it. I think we are all well aware of the catalyst event that occurred that led us to this point, but I'd like to touch on it a little bit before going in recognizing that I think it's important to note that many were affected. The individual acted on his own accord. This is not someone that had a direct tie to the student, the faculty, or the school itself. Certainly did not include this in his proposal of the float because it would have been prevented back then, right? And as he mentioned, this is multifaceted. So kudos to anybody on the call that is from the Hanover location. Because it was people in the crowd that saw and reported it. And following up, when you hear and you read the news, it's difficult to try to navigate the truth. And I think that's what's great about this space tonight, is having the phenomenal panel that we have and listening to the answers. We have an excellent set of questions, Q&A here for our panelists. But I think it's going to continue to pull back the layers of what's really going on. Because as the story unfolds, there were people that saw and didn't even know what it was, right? So education is power. We would be remiss if we let go of the thought process that we don't need to know history or it was so long ago, because it will truly repeat itself. And that's where we need to unite as people in a community full of differences and see the beauty and humanity in that. I'd also like to give a special, shout out to the bishop for acting quickly. I think before I got to read more of what happened, there was already an acknowledgement and next steps taking place. And so it's important to honor that while many were hurt and we don't 100% know the motive, we do know the impact, and we're going to learn more tonight about the impact. But the school in its totality, if I can be candid, has been put through it. I've heard that there were threats made to the school afterwards. Some students decided, it was best for them to go to a different school. There's been a lot. And I think that when we have town hall discussions like this, it's an excellent place to start while there's other things going on. So I know we have members from ADL on the call. Education is a huge component of this, well received, well desired. And those steps, dates are planted and moving forward. So in short, I'll wrap it up in saying that I'm very excited for tonight. I'm very excited for the questions that are coming, to hear from the panelists and their expertise on this. We're going to open it up for a Q&A portion or comments from the audience at the end. And of course, special message from Executive Director Lassiter in that he wishes everyone a happy New Year's. He looks forward to hearing the fruit of this conversation. And he left me with a quote, but I'm going to put it in the chat so that you have it to chew on a little bit, whether you're familiar with it or not. That's what this experience is all about. So thank you again, and I'll turn it over to Hector Torres-Diaz.
Thank you so much, Director Meck. And before we begin, there is one little housekeeping matter I have to take care of. This session is being recorded. So it is against the law in Pennsylvania to record oral conversations without permission of the folks involved in most circumstances. Remaining on the call means you are consenting to being recorded. And this session is being recorded for training and or record-keeping purposes. By participating in the session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and the use of this session. At any time, if you have any question or comment, feel free to place your question in the chat and we will respond to you as soon as possible. If you would like to ask your question or comment verbally, please note that by doing so, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of your statements recorded as part of this session. If you have any questions, please let us know. I've also posted it in the chat. So now moving on, Director Mac really created a great transition point, as this is where we kind of wanted to start with all of our panelists. And it's, could you provide us, before doing that, I'd like to introduce you. My apologies, I got so excited, I got ahead of myself. You probably need to know who they are. Um, so I'd like to start off with Ms. Rachel Singer. She is the director of the Clear Center for Jewish Life at FNM, fellow at Franklin and Marshall College. She specializes in Jewish education, interfaith dialogue, and anti-Semitism training. She holds an MA in Judaic Studies from Towson University and a BA in Comparative Religion, Anthropology, and International Affairs from Rollins College, and is currently pursuing a PhD in anti-Semitism studies at Gratz College. Rachel is actively engaged in Jewish and interfaith life in Central PA. She is involved with her synagogue in York, serves as a member of the Lancaster Interfaith Coalition, and regularly presents on Jewish life, Holocaust education, and contemporary anti-Semitism throughout the region. Outside of her professional work, Rachel enjoys spending time with her husband and 3 children, cheering them on in their academic and extracurricular pursuits, and volunteering as her daughter's lacrosse coach. Seems like she has a lot of spare time. So, um, continuing to Deb Smith, she has a BS in music education from Millersville University. Shout out to my alma mater, an MA in Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and a certificate in diversity and inclusion from Cornell University. Currently, she is enrolled in a PhD program in Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Gratz College. Deb is also a United States Holocaust Memorial Museum Teacher Fellow, a Jewish Foundation for the Righteous Fellow, has completed the Community of Holocaust Education Centers training, and is part of the Holocaust and Jewish Resistance Teachers Program. She is a retired educator of 34 years who taught numerous music ensembles. In addition, Deb taught a high school elective on music and musicians of the Holocaust, sponsored several trips to USAHMM, hosted book clubs, and hosted Holocaust survivor speakers. Deb is also an interim minister of music at St. Matthew's Lutheran Church and the external programs and arts coordinator at the YWCA in Hanover. Next, we have our very own PHRC's Alana M. Berman. She is the director of Policy, Intergovernmental Affairs, and Mediation at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. She brings an extensive experience in mediation, communication, community relations, and policymaking. Berman holds a BA in printmaking and drawing. She graduated summa cum laude and a master's in developmental and abnormal psychology, where she graduated magna cum laude from Rutgers University, along with a certificate in state and local government from the Eagleton Institute of Politics. She is recognized for her leadership in social justice and educational equity initiatives. Lastly, but surely not least, we have Adrielle Resch. She serves as a director of Jewish life and culture at the York JCC and is deeply committed to Holocaust education that feels personal, relevant, and alive. She recently curated an 80th anniversary liberation commemoration Seder honoring survival while encouraging reflection on the present. Drawing from her own family's Holocaust history, Adrielle speaks to how generational memory shapes response to anti-Semitism in today's world. Seeing how incredibly impressive all of these panelists are, I'm going to dive right in because I'm very excited. So as I almost jumped to earlier, just very quickly, why did you all accept the invite to today, and what was your internal reaction to the Hanover incident, and what does it reveal about the work that we have ahead of us? And any of you can go in any particular order.
I'll start because I'm from Hanover. I was not at the parade, and it was a friend of mine that is part of the Jewish community. And he called me and he said, "Were you at the parade?" And I said, "No." And he sent me the pictures. And my first reaction, I was horrified. I could not believe on a float with tombstones, a jukebox, and the gate of Auschwitz. And there was no mistaking what it was because it had the German Arbeit macht frei. Um, and then I was deeply saddened because it was truly, I know we have work to do, but that just said we have more work to do. I am not playing any blame game. I know we need to move forward, and I am a big believer in education. The more education we can provide, the better we are. And obviously, Holocaust, of course, as a former teacher, and even now, I still do presentations and working on my doctorate. I believe so strongly in Holocaust education. That is a huge event, and we are seeing it played out over and over. There are red flags there that we need to look at, and we need to do something. We need to educate. There are so many moments from the Holocaust, from bystanders. Why did people just stand and allow things to happen? We need to have a generation that is willing to stand up. And we did. People said this was wrong. I love the outpouring from the community of why is this happening in Hanover? And that gave me some hope that there is that outrage in this community.
Um, Rachel, you seem very excited to jump in, so I don't want to cut that away from you.
Well, I first saw what happened at the Halloween parade on social media. So that was my first glimpse at the parade float. And as we all know, social media um, social media has its benefits and it has its negatives. So, really, what I was seeing a glimpse of was just the image and maybe some byline, some tagline, right? But it was really my immediate reaction was shock because I work at F&M as Hector mentioned, but I live in York. My daughter has participated in YWCA events in Hanover and has played lacrosse in Hanover. So it's really, it's pretty close in proximity. And my immediate reaction to what I was seeing was confusion and shock and a little bit of sadness. For me, it wasn't necessarily the imagery itself, but after reflecting through the imagery, it was really what it revealed about how easily the Holocaust symbols can be detached from their historical meaning and used without any type of understanding or explanation. And to me, as a parent, as someone who is an informal educator in this type of work within the Jewish community, thinking about going to a Halloween parade, thinking about the possibility of having been there with my children, and then having all of the possible questions that would have come out of that, and not having been prepared, because there really is no way to prepare for something like that. Um, and I think, the incident really just underscores, as Deb said, the type of work that is still needed around this subject in terms of education as well as relationship building. I think Cheryl spoke to it, but the fact that the Archdiocese had an immediate response and that the crowd had an immediate response offered a little bit of relief, but at the same time, there's just so much more work that needs to be done, and that's partly why we're all here this evening.
So I'll hop in next. So when I first saw it, it was very confusing. As Deb said, it had like a jukebox and Ghost on a swing, and I had to rewatch it a couple times and be like, what is going on here? So my initial reaction was someone definitely got a message crossed a little bit, and I read into it more. Um, but for me, as someone who has walked under those exact gates and who had family die in Auschwitz, it is definitely a very, you kind of can come off with a bit of a defensive response to it. But as both Deb and Rachel said, it's an education opportunity. And even when that happened, we all spring into caller people, message Deb, I messaged Rachel, message, so and so. Where do we need to be? Where do we need to help? Because we do have that emotional response, but in the work that we do, we know that this is an opportunity to teach people about it. The one thing that did bother me the most were the comment sections, which, you're never supposed to read the comment sections, but for us as educators, we need to see what's out there. And there were so many more Holocaust denial comments than this blatant anti-Semitic comments. It was a real eye-opener, and I was actually able to even educate myself on things that were going on, not just in our community, but since it made, national, international news, able to get a better picture to see kind of where we need to fill in the gaps with educating people. And like I said, so many community members reached out to see if are you okay? And then what do we do? So that's where we kind of went from there.
And I've only lived in PA for about a year now, so my initial reaction was, okay, cool, it's here too. Especially having come from northern New Jersey, where it is, I'm just glad I left. And so that was just kind of eye-opening from that perspective. And then, thinking about the size of the gate, and that to some of the points, it does say Arbeit macht frei. There is only one gate in the world that says Arbeit macht frei. And I was baffled as to how it got that far without anybody flagging it. And I appreciate that the diocese moved quickly. But how did it get that far that they had to do this movement? And that for me was the biggest concern more than anything, because, I've come from working at ADL and the Jewish Federation. And so I have seen how quick and well and great people respond to incidents, but at the same time, don't do a lot to prevent them from happening.
Thank you. It's really important to have this background so that we as a whole understand why they're here with us to share such important information. So if we don't understand the why, then we can't really go from there. But with that said, to understand the present, we must look at the foundations of these symbols. The incident in Hanover exists within a long, painful lineage of how Jewish history is perceived. Let's explore the historical weight behind these images and why the sacred memory of the Holocaust demands a specific level of reverence. And in this particular context, we're going to really hamper down with Adriel and Deb, and you guys can chime in to whichever question you want. But let's start with the weight of imagery. Why is depicting sites like Auschwitz as a theme or a costume fundamentally different from other historical references? And how do we communicate the concept of sacred memory to the public?
Well, imagery of the Holocaust should never be used in any type of entertainment venue, whether it be a parade, a festival. It is incredibly disrespectful to the victims and survivors to use something like the Holocaust as a celebration. That's not, no. It's trivializing the suffering and that people went through. It's promoting anti-Semitism. It's promoting hate. It's insensitive. It's triggering to people, like Rachel said, about if she was there with her kids and saw this, how would she explain this? Like that it should never happen. That is not the place for Holocaust imagery at all.
And I would say, like, sometimes with Holocaust imagery, there's a lot of really important work even being done in York about how do we use Holocaust imagery even just for educational purposes, because a lot of the people in those images did not give their consent, and now we're using them as a teaching tool. So Kay McAdams over at York College, she's doing really wonderful work with her students, and she gives me updates. It's terribly fascinating, but whenever I do teach students about certain Holocaust imagery, I sometimes make them critically think about the image they're seeing. Even in a more modern lens, there is a company, this happens a lot where someone will release a shirt or a dress, and immediately we're all like, oh my gosh. Whereas someone that maybe isn't as used to those images just wouldn't know. There's a dress company I follow, and they had this, very vintage, cute dress, but to me, it looked like a concentration camp uniform. And when I showed a side by side to my students, they were like, oh my gosh, there it is. A few years ago, there was I think it was like an Anne Frank costume, like Spirit Halloween. It looked like a Kinder Transport costume. And, us as Jewish people, that imagery, we know what it symbolizes, and it's not a costume unless it's being used, for an educational play and such. So we do sometimes have those strong reactions because we also are using those images to teach, and we almost feel like stewards of those images and very protective of the people in those images and what it is then used for.
And I'll piggyback that with the imagery. And I'll be honest, teaching about the Holocaust is an art. You just don't go in and start teaching it. I swear by the Holocaust Museum in DC. I've done all their training in how to teach the Holocaust. Because believe it or not, there are teachers that will do simulations. I was talking with Rachel about that today. You cannot ever simulate putting kids in a closet and saying that's like being in a rail car. Even though a teacher might have the best intentions, there's no way anyone can understand that horror. And the same when you use, like, I'm very careful when I use photos. And I loved how Adriel said that. We are using these, but we are the keepers of these. These people have not really given us permission. But I think about, why do I want to use this photo? I usually steer away from photos that are shocking. And I know there are some teachers that like to put, the body count and all. That's more shocking. You want kids to, when I look at something, I usually will have kids look at it and I give them a list of questions. What are the expressions of the people in this photo? What do you think is happening to them? And have them analyze it and think, like, look at the details. How do you know that there are Jews in this photo? Oh, well, we see the Star of David on their clothes. So you have to be, not that all teaching is an art, but Holocaust education, you have to know what you are doing, because there's a saying, you need to take kids safely in and bring them safely out, because it is such a heavy topic. Even as an adult studying it, there are times I have to step away and say, I can't handle that. And when you're working with kids, even high school kids and even adults, you have to think, what is my purpose for using this imagery, for teaching this part?
Thank you for that. And so, with that said, then I also like to touch upon uh, the subtopic of like the evolution of hate, and where we talk about traditional anti-Semitic myths like blood libel, which are centuries old, and how do these ideas reemerge in modern voices, and why is it so persistent?
I'm gonna let Deb answer that one. She's definitely got the more historic brain. I've got kind of some of the I grew up down south experience with that.
Well, Judaism was a monotheistic religion, whereas the early Romans were not. They worshipped many gods. So Jews were ostracized. Anti-Semitism, that term was not coined until around 1878. It had been more anti-Judaism, which was the prejudice against the religion. And then, and believe it or not, I will just put this out there. There's a great, very short video that the Holocaust Museum has that's an overview of the roots of anti-Semitism that is very well put together, that Jews were ostracized into ghettos. Before Hitler came to power, that would happen. Jews, and then of course, when the crucifixion of Christ came, then it was, well, Jews were responsible for that, which of course is not true. Romans crucified Christ. In Judaism, crucifixion was not a form of punishment, but that myth kind of kept going on. And then I like to remind people that Jesus was a Jew. And he lived as a Jew and he died as a Jew. He did not die as a Christian. Christianity rooted out of the teachings of Jesus. But it's interesting, a lot of church history, well into the 1970s and 80s, was anti-Semitic. Of course, I'm a little more well-versed on the Lutheran religion, but Martin Luther, who at first, his goal was to convert Jews to Christianity. But Jews didn't want to convert. And then as his life went on, and there were a lot of reasons. He was ill, his favorite daughter had died. He wrote a horrible pamphlet about how awful the Jews are, which was used in the Lutheran Church. It has only been, I wish I do not know that date offhand, but the Lutheran Church has taken responsibility that they do not teach that. And they disavow that teaching from Martin Luther and have made that relationship building and apologizing to Jews, the Jewish faith, but even in the Catholic religion. And during the Holocaust, which is where I specialize, when the Lutheran Church split into two as the nationalistic church and the confessing church, the nationalistic church was going to rewrite the Bible that made Jesus an Aryan and get out any writings that even referred to Jews. They were going to rewrite all of that because they had that idea as Jesus was this great Aryan warrior. And the confessing church was not perfect. They wanted to protect more of the converted Jews. That's a whole other presentation. So I will leave it at that. But those myths, and I think the one that is the worst, and this is where anti-Semitism comes from. In the 1800s in Germany, Jews were becoming more a part of society. They were assimilating. They were getting more rights because they were discriminated against. And as they got more rights, they were very successful. Now, keep in mind, in Germany at this time, out of 60 million people, there were only 500,000 Jews in Germany. Germany had maybe 0.1% of the population was Jewish. But Wilhelm Marr became incredibly bitter by the success of Jews and blamed this huge conspiracy, which we still hear today. I mean, Jews are responsible for the Black Plague. Jews are responsible for 9/11. They have this huge world conspiracy. But Wilhelm Marr is the one that coined the term anti-Semitism. And he was quite proud to be called an anti-Semite. But that hatred has been around since ancient times. And of course, I have never understood that because the root of Christianity is Judaism. That's the root. How can you hate part of you? And as someone that grew up, I didn't really know what Jews were until I became older. And I realized, oh my gosh, this is what's happening here. But the roots, I have to be honest, I still have trouble. I know the facts, but I don't get it. I don't know how you blame a percentage of people except that you need a scapegoat. And after World War One, Jews were used as the scapegoat for losing World War One, which was the stab in the back myth of the Holocaust. Even though Jews fought in World War One, they were still blamed for it. And it just seems like, and don't we see that in the world today? When something goes wrong, we have a scapegoat. We have to have somebody to blame. And again, there's always us and the others. And that has been around for centuries.
Yeah,
That was,
I'll probably add to that. It's really the othering.
yeah.
And whenever I do teach like any kind of comparative culture lessons to any students, it's, hey, this may look weird to you, but this is their culture because that's what happened to us. I've been seeing it a lot, so much everywhere. And I'm more curious, and the more it's probably detrimental to my mental health, but I just kind of keep following and keep following. There's a lot of anti-Semitic imagery out there, new anti-Semitic imagery when it comes to Jews with money,
Mhm.
caricatures of certain Jewish people in the world right now, that where they may be a political cartoon, it may be Jewish people grabbing money, those kinds of things. They may not see it as, oh, this is a Jewish person grabbing money. This is this Jewish political figure or person doing a money grab. That just goes very, very far back to that Jews have control all the money, we control all the banks. And I can't even escape it. I was in England, walk into the Tower of London, having a great time looking at the ravens, and then bam, they have a whole exhibit on coin clipping. And it's a great exhibit if you're ever there, but my friend was like, look, you cannot escape this. I'm like, it really is everywhere. It's in every country. It's just everywhere. And just some of those images where people may not be connecting it as an anti-Semitic image. They're like, oh, it's just a political cartoon or this and that. Drawing a Jewish person nowadays with a giant nose holding a bag of money. That's anti-Semitic imagery that goes back to all the propaganda going, but even back further than just during the Holocaust. So,
Well,
when I see all that, I'm kind of like, can they come up with something new? Because this is literally just wash, rinse, repeat. And it's one of the things whenever we do a challah bake here, we share our challah because even challah and matzah used to be, they used to think that we put Christian baby blood into that and use it at Shabbat and all of that. And it's just ridiculous. And even when I was younger, I'm only 40 years old. I know I'm an old lady, but it wasn't that long ago that I had people that wouldn't eat at my house because it was Jewish food, or I couldn't be friends with them because they thought that their parents told them that like Jews controlled the world and that we weren't trustworthy. So it's
well,
it's still around.
and
And now even with my children, there have been a few incidences that have come up, and it just never ends. It's always going on.
and the to go to that point, that connection between Jews and money, there was a time that no one, it was considered beneath someone to work with money. So Jews were forced to, that was the only position they could do, is work with money. So that's where that stereotype comes from. But it wasn't because they were greedy for money. It just was the only profession because it was just considered beneath others to do that.
Similarly, the entertainment industry, actors and actresses and performers were considered to be, unchristian, unacceptable people. And so a lot of those roles were then filled by Jewish folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very much. Thank you for that. So now we're going to move to this uh, policy context. And so while history provides the why, our state policies provide a framework for the how. how we educate and how we respond. Pennsylvania has clear mandates like Act 70, yet we still see a disconnect between what is required on paper and what is practiced in our classrooms. With that said, I'd like to get into this education gap question, which is regarding Act 70. Why is there often a gap between the legal mandate for Holocaust education and the classroom reality?
Well, I'll start there. The big issue, I think, especially from a policy perspective, is that it's basically an unfunded mandate. And any mandate that goes unfunded is thereby unenforceable. And without enforcement, you don't have compliance. And without compliance, you don't have the education. And there, so it's kind of a trickle down effect there. And because it's unfunded, even those educators that wish to engage with the work don't have the necessary resources to engage with the work properly. And oftentimes, as a result, unintendedly do more harm than good. And it's not getting any cheaper to do Holocaust education as we are losing our Holocaust survivors. We just recently today lost Anne Frank's sister as a Holocaust survivor. And so as we then try to figure out other ways to bring those experiences and that narrative to the classroom, you're looking at all of these new technological and other programs, which are cost prohibitive for many, and without state funding, it becomes very difficult.
Director Berman, quick question. So in the comments, I just noticed somebody mentioned, can you explain what Act 70 is?
So I believe Act 70 is the requirement for there to be Holocaust education in Commonwealth schools.
I'm gonna jump in as well. So Act 70 is a mandate, like Alana was saying, that ensures that Holocaust education is taught within the Pennsylvania public schools. But there are different levels, and I know there are different levels in which schools provide information and provide training and provide resources within the confines of Holocaust education. And prior to this call and in preparation, I spoke with a close friend of mine, a community member who had a big hand in helping to pass Act 70 to kind of find out where we are currently. And I was told that 96% of schools participate in Act 70. And what that does is it allows free educational resources and guidelines that were established through the Shoah Foundation, the Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL, Gratz College, and the Pennsylvania Holocaust Education Foundation. And these were established as guidelines and teach the teacher kind of methods that branched out into our various communities. The thing with Act 70, as some on this call may know and others may not, is that because it's mandated and that there's not strict guidelines within Act 70, the teachers who participate in the training, they utilize those resources within the disciplines that they teach. So, as an example, not all Holocaust education here in Pennsylvania is taught within the framework of a history class, right? So sometimes it's taught within the framework of a history class, sometimes it's taught within the framework of an English or literature class, hence why you're reading either perhaps Night or The Diary of Anne Frank or many other, notable pieces of work. Sometimes it's being taught through music education, like Deb Deb has done and in school and within the community. So there's a huge spectrum of where Holocaust education fits in, and there's no set guidelines for the extensive nature or the time frame in which teachers have to teach it. So this is where things can get a little tricky, especially if you're spending such a short amount of time. I mean, teachers have so much to go over. There's so much curriculum to be pushed into the grade schools. Partly we are very fortunate that they are finding time, and yet is the time significant enough? And I think we could ask this of a lot of subjects, but this certainly is one of those conditions and those moments.
I
And
totally, Rachel.
please go ahead, Deb.
Oh, sorry. As someone that taught 34 years, it's tough to fit everything in. And I'm fortunate that I can go into some of our local schools and do presentations. Like when they do night, I do a week-long activities with Auschwitz and discuss that with the kids.
From on the same vein where Rachel ended, I want to go to this accountability question that we have on, which is kind of in line with that. So, how can policy better address the distinction between intent versus impact when public displays cause community harm, even if the organizers claim ignorance?
Rachel?
Okay. So I have lots of thoughts about this, and as someone who um, has been on a college campus and has seen a rise of anti-Semitism in the area and on campus. And, one of the earlier questions talked about the roots of anti-Semitism, and the roots are important. But what's also important to note is that anti-Semitism is like a disease that manifests, right? And it is not just one thing at one time. It's not a one and done scenario. And it has evolved and shapeshift, throughout centuries. And, you know, one of the questions that we talk about in the Jewish professional world, especially in the context in the place that I'm in, and with working with Hillels across the country, is, talking about intent, talking about what can hold people accountable and what are the legal parameters and definitions and how things can be responsible I'm not a policy expert, so I'll leave that to Alana. But what I will say in terms of this question and what I gave thought to is really that policy can better address harm by prioritizing foreseeable impact over claimed intent. And yet, from a policy component, that is next to impossible, in my opinion, in my limited knowledge of the law, to uphold. But when we are talking about a civil society and our civil responsibility, setting clear standards for public displays and mandatory review processes, and consequences to the community, while being paired with education, would help to limit some of these negative experiences. We can't always tell if it's malicious intent, right? I think all of us here on this call debated in our first couple of instances the reaction, using the parade float as that example, but we can look at lots of examples. Is it ignorance? Is it malice? Is it bias? Is it hate? A lot of times we just don't know. or it can be a combination of things. So I think setting up community norms and structures for a civil society, I think, is really helpful. Whether or not that's applicable, to the law, that's, and for people to be held accountable for their actions, that's a totally different story. I'll leave that to Alana.
Well, especially with how do we better define between intent and impact with public displays, I think it's really important that from a policy perspective that, as long as there are diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging standards still in the world, that Jews need to be included in that. I think the binary of treating Jews as kind of a monolithic white structure has been really harmful for Jews in America, especially because that's not how we're seen anywhere else in the world. So that's been really difficult. And so a lot of folks I've seen, especially in public displays, hide behind that and hide behind the guise of political speech. And then in terms of teaching standards, I think there needs to be, and I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, so I'm just going to acknowledge that. I think there needs to be more focus on teaching about Jewish humanity in context outside of the Holocaust, particularly with kind of Jewish contributions to American society. I think teaching to see us as Jews as members of the community instead of that othering, which has been so deeply embedded throughout centuries in every aspect of society and other religions. And that's really what we're kind of going up against, is a lot of deep programming. And so I think that's one way to really approach it from a policy perspective.
I like what you said about that. I hate to keep going back, but when I was teaching, I wanted my students to understand that Jews are no different than anyone else, but a different religion. So I would put pre-war Jewish life photos out, and each kid would pick one, and then they would research it, and then I would have them go home and find a photo from their family or their life that would match it, because there were family picnics, families at the beach, soccer photos that they could see. Oh, well, there really is no difference. I don't understand why people would target them. And I think that is a good point. And I think too, sometimes we do define Jews with the Holocaust. And I think that is a trap we all fall into.
So, with that said, now we're going to go to the last topic that we're going to discuss in this part of the program. It's going to be a little bit of a fusion here, but, we all know that policies often struggle to keep pace with the modern world. So today, anti-Semitism is fueled by media, memes. We've talked about, all of these caricature images depicting money, things of that nature, and they now reach younger audiences in a way we've never experienced it before. But that also means that we now have to center this on a human element. Beyond the laws, we need to center it around real people where, Jewish life and the rest of our community is rooted, so that we can bring this core issue to a halt. So with that said, this is where all of our panelists get to piggyback off each other and have fun. But there was a question in the chat that I saved for this very purpose. And it was, can the panel also please comment on how the current atmosphere of permitting or encouraging anti-Zionism creates societal permission to be anti-Semitic? We are facing anti-Semitism at a level we have never seen in our lifetimes since the Holocaust. Anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are clearly linked. Now, that is a very, very heavy question. And, You all seem very enthused to get in. So let me take a step back and let Rachel go first.
Um, well, thank you to whoever brought this up. My chat's not open. And yet, this is a very controversial topic, right? And it's one that for me personally, really resides specifically within the past 2.5 years after October 7th. Because as I mentioned, we tend to see um, anti-Semitism evolve over time, right? And, the question of what is Zionism? What is anti-Semitism? What definition we are going to adopt, whether the IRA definition is appropriate or inappropriate and leads to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Man, I have really been in heated conversations on this very topic. What I will say, to try to speak a little bit broadly, but yet with experience, right? Because not everybody is going to agree on how things are defined. And, I think that, um, look, Israel is a country. In my opinion, in my home, Israel has a right to exist. And just like any country, right, we have the ability and to disagree with how the government acts. And in Israel, the people, the Israelis, both Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis and everything in between, because in Israel, right, many on the call know, but Israel is a diverse place. And they too have a right to disagree with the government. And before October 7th, we saw a lot of that disagreement. If you follow Israeli politics, you saw in mass quantities people protesting the Supreme Court judges in Israel. So this disagreement or this internal struggle or strife that sometimes we have with politicians and decisions of our government, right? That is a democratic value. And that is a value that we as Americans hold. It's a democratic value that Israelis hold. What changes the narrative for me when I explain things to my students and when I explain things to colleagues is really that anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitic when it denies Jews the right to self-determination. It applies double standards that you would never see happen to another nation state, or uses anti-Israel language that also smush in together the old anti-Semitic tropes that we were just kind of talking about. It targets Jewish identity and Jewish peoplehood. And to me, that's when things transition. How to observe that and to think critically about that concept, um, you know, is sometimes a challenge, and certainly has been very controversial as we've seen the Israeli-Palestinian conflict unfold. But what I will say, in my opinion, right, is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict um, does not define what anti-Semitism is. And to me, that is such a key factor. Because if you know Middle East history, this is not a new war. This is not a new engagement. As I say very publicly and with my students, the Palestinian people have gotten the short end of the stick for a very long time. But when you have communities calling for an intifada, when you have communities that are defacing Jewish institutions, when you have communities targeting Jewish individuals, both in person, like my colleagues on campus who had wanted signs of themselves plastered all over campus, or whether you have influencers online being targeted or dropped because of their Judaism, not because they believe that Israel has a right to exist. If we look at that framework as the bare bone minimum of what Zionism is, I mean, Zionism is a lot more than that. And frankly, before October 7th, I don't think I ever thought of myself as a Zionist just because did I, have I traveled to Israel? Yes. Am I Jewish? Yes, but it wasn't a frame of mind that I had, right? But I think really that when you lump a people together and you utilize them all together, that's when it becomes anti-Semitic. That's when a bias happens. That's when, it's what we see in other forms of racism or Islamophobia or xenophobia. Like this is a prejudice. It's a hate. It's a hatred. And yeah, th those. I'll leave it at that. Those are my big feelings.
I'm honest.
Well, I think
I couldn't have said it better myself. That was just so, how you put that was just perfect.
Yeah, I think one of the real issues here is that the Jewish community, a lot of the Jewish community and a lot of the non-Jewish community are trying to have two different conversations. The Jewish community sees Zionism outside of a political identity. For many Jews, Zionism means, I have the right to self-determination. I have the right to a homeland. I have a right to safety. And that's what it really means as a fundamental element in addition to the religious aspect. And so when we hear that somebody's anti-Zionist, many of us here we're being told we don't have a right to safety, we don't have a right to a homeland, we don't have a right to self-determination. And trying to get that understanding across to folks who are in many cases almost indoctrinated to seeing Zionism as only through a political lens, which does not allow then Jews to disassociate from the term Zionism either as either a political or a non-political entity. And so it intrinsically links us to much of the anti-Zionist activity, which is much of it is targeting Jews regardless of their political affiliation and without the folks even knowing it. And so, and why is that being done? Because Zionism writ large is associated with Jews. There's this circular argument that then is being made in the public that these aren't the cases, it's only political. And too many folks have latched onto that and refused to see it anywhere else. And then to compound it, then, to Deb's point, she brought up the Intifada. Folks don't know what they're saying. Folks don't know what these things mean or what they're hearing. They don't know what the history of the Intifada means or what that means. And they're often given false definitions or false narratives behind the history. The same with the Nakba. And so they're getting like one-sided distorted history, latching onto that. And because they're also getting this information with a baseline of anti-Semitism just existing in society, it all kinds of start building on each other. And yeah, people just latch onto it.
And I think you hit the nail on the head, is that the information people are getting, they will believe whatever they see without doing their due diligence of, let's research this and see if it's true. If they see it on Twitter, they take that as, oh my gosh, did you see this happened? I'm like, did you look into that? That's not true. Or if they see, but even now you have AI with videos, and it's just, as a human being, you have to do your due diligence. You've got to research. You can't take things at face value.
Yeah, lack of media literacy for sure.
Oh my.
I wanted to also kind of what Deb was saying earlier. She was trying to have her students relate, like, oh yes, my family also does this, what Jewish folks do. So there's also this movement of diasporism where Jews should be allowed to be wherever everybody else is. So there's also that thought of, if we're allowed to be in spaces, then is there then this Zionist identity? So it's been really interesting to read up on and study more about it. For me personally, I was in Auschwitz, and then 20 hours later, I was climbing Masada. So that's been, we even have a Holocaust survivor in our community who her family fled Berlin once her father was kicked out from being a judge. They went to Israel. They weren't able to come to the United States due to the immigration quotas and everything like that. So it is that broader issue of, we also had other survivors that tried to go home. Their houses were overtaken. Their families were then killed for going back after the war. So it's not there. It's said, like Rachel was saying, it's such a bigger issue. And of course, us as Jews, we just want to be safe wherever we are. Um, we're kind of like, hi, we see you. Please don't kill us. We just want to be able to exist with everybody else and, you know, be a part of all the different communities. Like, we're Jewish, and instead of just how lately it seems sometimes you're either, as a Jewish person, you're either Zionist or anti-Zionism sometimes. And it gets a little frustrating to be kind of grouped into these groups that, when us as people, we're not always black and white.
So, with these last 8 minutes here of this particular section of our program that we have for you guys tonight, I want to ask this particular question, and just very briefly from each of the panelists, very briefly.
We're not a brief bunch.
um, Following an incident, that this is about community healing. So I think this is very important based on everything you just mentioned. So, following an incident like the one in Hanover, what are the first steps to transition from harmful ignorance to a community wide educational shift?
They need to be honest. The entity needs to be honest and name what happened. Too often I see folks try to avoid calling out the anti-Semitism or naming it as anti-Semitism. And so I think that's an important first step.
To me, it's education, and we're providing different education workshops along with my good friend Rachel Singer at the YW. It was heartening. We had, after the incident, we had um, the presentation. I did a presentation on Auschwitz and why that should not be used. And we did have 75 people attend, which was a great first start. So we're going to continue with the education. And I like that people are reaching out. A school in Maryland is doing The Sound of Music, and they asked me to do a presentation on the background of the Anschluss and Hitler's rise to power so the kids understand how important that is as part of that musical. But to me, it's putting education out there. I have to be honest, as a teacher, that's what I believe in. It's the only way we can turn things around. I can't take that people did not know that that was the gate of Auschwitz. I can't, I need people to know. Like, I love that people knew that immediately. How are there people that don't know that? And how do we catch them and teach them about that?
So I'll jump in. So, as we kind of mentioned, like there's the proactive educational components that I think communities can do to help foster people's understanding about the Holocaust, about anti-Semitism, and And yet, what I do want to make a point of is to, on the back end of this experience happening, I shared that I, reached out to a friend of mine who I'm not sure if he was able to hop on. I can't see all the pages, but he has been working really close with the Bishop Senior and the Archdiocese of Harrisburg and Hanover. He is a consultant for the ADL, and he shared that their schools are working very closely with the ADL to expand Holocaust education all across their schools as a result of this incident, and that they are working very hard on coming up with educational programs and teacher programs and the specifics of that is not being released just yet because they're still kind of in the weeds of it. But to me, that is such a monumental start, right? Hitting it at the root of this particular situation. But I agree with Deb, like our educational reach is really important. But I also really agree with Alana talking about how, you know, knowing about Judaism is and Jews is very different than knowing about the Holocaust or knowing about anti-Semitism, which is the hatred of Jews, right? I'll just give one plug because I think she is absolutely brilliant. Dara Horn, if you haven't read her book, People Love Dead Jews, if you haven't heard her speak, she's amazing. And maybe one day I can call her a good friend of mine. But she just created the Tell Institute, which provides educational resources. What she is doing is amazing and brilliant and innovative. And I can't speak highly enough about the work that she has been thrust into because she's a scholar of Yiddish. And this was never her journey until it became her journey. So I'll just give that little plug.
Yeah, I'll probably come at from just a little bit of different angle, but those who know me say I say it a lot is making this kind of situation relatable. There are at least three saints that were in Auschwitz. They're talked about quite frequently. And then also, if you don't know about Father Dubois' work, I actually got to meet him the same night that Deb was giving her presentation in Hanover. I was in DC at an event at the French Embassy, and I was told he coined the term the Shoah by bullets. He's responsible for finding the mass graves of before there were the gas chambers. The Nazis were going through town to town, just shooting people to death into mass graves. So there is work in this, field of Holocaust education that's not just done by Jewish people. There's so many other people that were affected by this and by the Holocaust. So that's another thing I keep saying, oh, this is just a Jewish issue, and it's really not. So that's why when people do ask me about this incident, I make it relatable, mentioning Father Dubois and the saints that were at Auschwitz. And I believe a few of the popes have actually been to Auschwitz and walked through it, and that's always very meaningful.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to get to part two of tonight's event, and it's breakout rooms. So we have 4 breakout rooms, and these amazing panelists you have before you tonight each will be leading a panel within the breakout rooms, and it'll be the policy breakout room, the historic anti-Semitism, social implications of historic anti-Semitism, and contemporaneous manifestations. And it'll go by Director Berman, Deb Smith, excuse me, Adriel Resch, and Rachel Sayer. So I will open these in and have you guys go in there.
And we have about, what, 15 minutes?
So it's about 15 minutes. If you take, give or take, if you take 5 extra minutes because the conversation is too good, that's totally okay. I understand. All righty, let's do it. Welcome back, everybody. It by the conversations that I'm seeing here, it seems like the breakout rooms were quite successful and educational. So with this last segment here, maybe the next 10 minutes, I just kind of want to enter a dialogue with everybody where you kind of ask some additional questions you didn't get a chance to during the breakout rooms or throughout the um, actual town hall. We just want to make sure that you get these last few, 10 the next 10 to 15 minutes to interact with the panelists directly. So we'd like to open it up for, questions. Your hand raised. Please feel free.
Laura?
I have a question. As a teacher, I'm a union member of NEA, and I don't know if I'm sure you know, but over the summer there were incidences where, and it wasn't as much concerning so much about the board because the board ended up saying that we are staying with the ADL, we support the ADL, but teachers, a lot of teachers non or made Jewish teachers feel very uncomfortable with other representatives in that meeting. I didn't go, but I read about what happened and read multiple different places. Reached out to a local rabbi in Lancaster and asked him about what should I do. Basically, write to them, and that's what I did. But I'm just curious from a human relations perspective, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm gonna let Hector answer it first.
There was a lot of information. Can you provide it to me one more time? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. So last summer there was a meeting with union reps from, I don't know if it was all over the state. I want to say it was all over the state. It's a National Education Association. And actually twice there were incidences. The first one was teachers saying we don't want to support, it had to do with the war, with Israel Hamas war. And we don't support the ADL. We don't support Holocaust education type things going on. The board ended up voting against it and saying we support the ADL, we support Holocaust education. But the teachers that were so supportive of we don't want to support Holocaust education, we don't support Jewish people, that's what it was coming across as, and making Jewish teachers feel uncomfortable at that event. I'm wondering from, I guess, a human rights perspective, what would you think to do? I mean, I know I wrote to a local rabbi who said write to the NEA, and that's what I did.
Yeah.
To be frank, yeah.
So I will say this is an NEA problem at large, and thankfully, PA is in a slightly better place than New Jersey, where the NJNEA actually adopted anti-Israel stances outright and decided that they aren't working with the ADL at all. But what I would suggest to any Jewish educators that feel ostracized, other, and made uncomfortable for their Judaism, regardless of whether or not it's their colleagues, their administrators, or their union, is they should file a workplace grievance with us, with PHRC. Everyone's entitled to a safe workplace where they, are able to work regardless of their background. So I would suggest that to them. I think addressing it with the, writing letters to the NEA is very important. I also know that the NEA does have a Jewish caucus, so I would recommend trying to track them down, as I'm sure they would welcome the membership and folks getting involved with them.
Thank you.
I saw that Ms. Beck had a question as well. You still there, Mr. Beck? Edward?
Oh, no, that's okay. My question was answered, so I took my hand up.
Perfect.
I just wanted to put into context because I think the earlier question about Act 70, allowed me to remember that not everyone comes with some of the base knowledge here. And so, what I think Laura, if I remember reading about this and a variety of other incidences similar to this, like, just putting it into context, this is a form of the boycott, divestments, and sanctions of Israel, the BDS movement, right? And the BDS movement is typically designed as a way to, is another way to determine Zionism, and yet it is a way to ostracize Jewish faculty members, it is Jewish students. It's a way to alienate them. It's not just about boycotting Israel and Israeli products, although that is what it typically utilizes. It's really there's an underlining motive, and that motive is exactly what you felt. So I'm really sorry that you had to go through that or that some of your colleagues did.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Maybe something that was left unsaid from one of the breakout rooms? I see Marlene Kanuk with her hand up. Please.
Okay, I unmuted. I'm not sure if this was NEA only represented by Pennsylvania schools or was it national. I'm not sure here in this, but I wouldn't hesitate reaching out to the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And there's she's Sally. I don't know if Sally's still there. But a person in charge of this Holocaust education at PD. I retired out of there now 10 years ago. Can't believe it's that long. But I worked also there 26 years and worked very closely with Ann Van Dyke and so, who's HRC. But I would say that why not reach out also to find out who that person is now and talk to them about this.
Thank you. I don't if do we have any other questions?
So the last thing and I brought it up a bunch in my breakout room around policy, but I didn't outright say it earlier, and I think it's important to, is one of the things that would really benefit a lot of these issues would be legislatively passing a standardized definition of anti-Semitism from my perspective. I think while many find that to be controversial, one of the biggest issues with enforcement and bringing action to corrective action to situations is the lack of a standardized definition. The fact that many institutions do not even have a definition of anti-Semitism, much less a public one or a standardized one. And so it allows entities to hide behind the guise of, I believe there's anti-Semitism and it covers a lot of things, but not this right here. And so I think by removing any of that guesswork for folks, it would allow people to better name and address it.
We have a question in the chat for you guys, and it says, I have had friends who are Jewish since I was very young and have always gotten along well with them. However, I'm having a real struggle with my anger with the prime minister of Israel killing 70,000 folks in Gaza. And I don't even know how to begin conversations with my Jewish friends. Any suggestions?
Well, my knee-jerk reaction is, why do you think you need to talk to this about this with your Jewish friends if your Jewish friends aren't Israeli? I find folks often want to use the situation and the conflict of Gaza as a litmus test to who they find to be an acceptable Jew. And we, as American Jews, have next to no influence over the political doings in a separate country. Even if, our foreign policy is very tied. I don't direct our foreign policy. I don't think any of us on this call do. But that's kind of my knee-jerk reaction to it.
I will say that your that Alana's bluntness about this very question, I think holds a lot of weight, and is extremely valid for how a lot of us have been made to feel. And yet, what I would also say, because I've been in conversation with, in fact, my brother about this, right? Who is, I mean, we were both Jewish, two Jewish parents, who holds a very different viewpoint than I do. And, what I would say is, if you want it, in my opinion, the way to extend a conversation, if it is coming from a real place of wanting to be in friendship with that individual or those individuals, is by also acknowledging that October 7th happened. And when I say that, what I mean is that in terms of the Jewish community, our separation from a Jewish or Israeli individual is not far off. I have students, well, first of all, I have family in Israel. Second of all, I have students who know hostages. I have friends who had family members killed in the conflict, right? This is very personal, in terms of a relationship. And I think when it comes to seeing from the world view, again, of everything that the Palestinian people have been through in this moment and before, is extremely valid and heartbreaking. And yet, when you talk to your Jewish friend, if you don't acknowledge their personal pain or suffering or connection to this issue, it is going to feel as if it is just a segue to talk about the Palestinian hunger crisis, the Palestinian rebuilding of Gaza, and all of those are extremely valid points, and they need to be solved, and they need to be solved on the world stage. Um, but yeah, so thank you for putting that in the chat. My chat's not open, so I don't see who's chatting. But so I think that that's part of the bridge. If you want to extend further than that, I would definitely lean into what Alana is saying. Is really why your friendship doesn't start and stop at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
And then for our last question of the evening, we turn to Mary Jo Daly.
Thank you. And I was just reacting to Alana's comment about getting the legislature to define, was it defining anti-Semitism? And as a member of the legislature, it made me think that maybe starting with the Jewish caucus that we have in the House, because you need, 102 votes to get anything passed in the House, and then it has to go to the Senate. It's so difficult, but it could be an interesting and educational conversation to start with that group.
I would love
So
to
it was,
discuss that with you further. I'd be happy to reach out tomorrow. I'd love to support that initiative in any way I could.
yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you tomorrow. Do you want me to put my contact info in? I'll
I
do
got
that
it.
into the chat. Or you have it, of
I have
course,
it.
because I got the email from you. So, okay, sure.
Awesome.
I don't think I have too many. I have some meetings tomorrow, but I'm really good at returning calls.
Perfect.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure.
Well, and with that, I just want to take, the maybe the next 2 to 3 minutes just to ask our panelists to give us, like what are their final thoughts and what should be our major takeaway from tonight. So I'll start the floor with Miss Resch.
Final thoughts. I have to go first. It's usually so much easier to follow up with Deb and Rachel. They give me so many good ideas. They're both really wonderful mentors to me. I'm just gonna throw that out there. I say final thoughts. As awful as the incident was that happened, I really did see the good come out of the community. When I do teach Holocaust, I'm always teaching my students to look for those helpers, look for the people that did the good. So that's just what I would leave at is it was bad. We moved on to educate. A lot more people learned a lot. And so we need to take it on that positive note, but we all know that there's just still so much more to be done. And as you saw with all of us, we all have different things that we can speak on, that we can teach. And we're all very lucky that we all do come together frequently to support each other and to educate.
Dr. Berman.
I just think I just think it's wonderful how many folks showed up to this conversation and how open and honest folks have been. I think that's the only way we really find ways to continue to come together and see other folks' humanity is by having difficult conversations in public and being vulnerable to both ask questions but also answer questions. So thank you.
Ms. Singer.
Well, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to the conversation, and for putting this together and for you all to spend your Monday evening, right after the holidays to talk about such a serious issue, right? And I think as Alana and Adriel said, like this is, it's something that is positive that came out of this experience. We need to foster more relationships. We need to be, the best advocates that we can be for one another. If you hear something or you see something that you don't understand, you know, you have you have all of us to reach out to if you have questions, right? And I am a firm believer that if we combat anti-Semitism, we will be combating all forms of bias. And that's really important, today and yesterday and tomorrow. So I guess that's my final words.
And lastly, Ms. Smith.
I don't think I can add much more, but I so appreciate this conversation and the number of people that are listening and want to know what they can do. How do we move forward? And that's the important thing, is that we learn from this and we do move forward in education and building those relationships. But thank you so much. Actually been a great conversation, and panelists, boy, I feel I'm with the best of the best.
Thank you so much for that. And now I'll turn it over to Director Cheryl Meck to close us out with final remarks.
Awesome. Thank you, Hector. Special thank you to the panelists tonight. think we all have been witness to just a wonderful conversation full of education, history, and modern day. I appreciate the breakout rooms and getting into even more intimate spaces of vulnerability. And a special thank you to all of you who joined us tonight. As you know, this was recorded, so please feel free. In the next day or two, we'll have it uploaded to our PHRC website. Continue to spread the word, continue to pass this out. I'm always going to encourage checking out the PHRC website itself. We are your state's leading civil rights enforcement agency. Anybody that, whether it's real, perceived, or imagined, we are equipped with neutral investigators and an intake team and legal team. File a complaint and let us take a look at it. So understanding and education is power and knowledge. So please leave tonight knowing that you have us, you have this education platform here, and more town halls to come. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening.